I would say I invite you to rise in the Spirit and stand if you are able for the reading of the Gospel. This is a dyslexic moment here. It's not 15 to 62. That'd be a long passage. It's Luke 9, 51 to 62. So that's what I'll be reading this morning. When the days drew near for Jesus to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers ahead of him. On their way, they entered a village of the Samaritans to make ready for him, but they did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. When his disciples James and John saw it, they said, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" But he turned and rebuked them, and they went on to another village. As they were going along the road, someone said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." To another he said, "Follow me." But he said, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God." Another said, "I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say farewell to those in my home." And Jesus said to him, "No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God." Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Thanks be to God. You'll be surprised to hear this, but there is a silly, childish joke that Sarah and I like a lot. As far as I know, it doesn't have a name, but if it did, it would be called "Your Face." The way it works is anytime someone offers any sort of criticism of you, you turn it back on that person using the words, "Your face." You go back and forth like this for a while, and it just gets stupider and stupider. We love it. Here's a typical exchange. "That was a really dumb comment you just made." "Your face is a dumb comment." "That doesn't make any sense." "Your face doesn't make any sense." "You're a jerk." "Your face is a jerk." And so on. It's hilarious. Now, if you all were on your game and were not being polite, one of you would have said, "Your face is hilarious." Hello. Missed a chance. In our reading from the Gospel of Luke today, we have a little bit of a "your face" moment, first century style. In verse 51, Luke tells us when the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. To set one's face means to decide resolutely on a course of action. This is a hinge moment in Luke's story. It is the moment when Jesus leaves Galilee and heads to Jerusalem. And it's not for a pleasure excursion that he's going there either. His intention is to confront the consolidated powers of religion and state, demanding justice for the oppressed people of the land, and he knows that there is a strong likelihood that it is not going to turn out well for him in the end. But he understands it to be his mission, so he sets his face for the journey. To get from Galilee to Jerusalem, however, he must either go through the region of Samaria or take a wide detour around. Many Jewish travelers in that day chose the latter option anyway, because of their profound prejudice and animosity toward the Samaritans. Jesus apparently does not share these ill feelings and sends messengers ahead to prepare a place for his party to stay in one of the Samaritan villages. But when the Samaritans discover that Jesus' goal is Jerusalem, and that he has set his face to get there, they refuse to receive him in their town. It turns out that the Samaritans willingly reciprocate the Jews' animosity. "Oh, your face is going to Jerusalem?" they say. "Well, your face can't stay here. So sorry for your face." Jesus understands that such rejections are par for the course in his work and seems prepared to let this insult slide. But his disciples are not quite so forgiving. James and John, those hot-headed brothers whom Jesus has nicknamed the sons of thunder, get all indignant and say, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down out of heaven and consume them?" One imagines them rubbing their hands together in anticipation, though one also wonders what gives these two knuckleheads the idea that they have the power to pull off such a stunt. They are probably thinking of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which got torched for their failure to show hospitality to strangers, or the story of how the prophet Elijah called down fire on two companies of soldiers trying to arrest him. But how they think they belong in the same company as angels or Elijah is anybody's guess. When he hears this suggestion, Jesus turns and rebukes James and John. Luke doesn't tell us exactly the words he uses, but I like to imagine him saying, "Shut your face." And they go on to another village. What follows is a series of exchanges between Jesus and some would-be disciples. The first comes from an unnamed enthusiast who exclaims, "I will follow you wherever you go." Now, I would be overjoyed if anybody ever said anything like that to me. But Jesus is unimpressed. He replies, "Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." He is warning this person that discipleship is tough. There are no five-star hotels on the road Jesus is taking, and a follower of Jesus wouldn't be able to afford to stay there even if there were. Walking the way of Jesus can be a lonely occupation, a thankless endeavor, and certainly not a way to make one's fortune. Even the wild animals, the foxes and the birds of the air, have secure places to sleep, but Jesus and his band have no such haven. And as the response by the Samaritan villagers demonstrates, they cannot always depend upon the kindness of strangers. But there may be more to this saying than meets the eye. Earlier in the gospel, Jesus tells a parable in which a farmer scatters seed rather haphazardly. And some of it falls on the path where the birds of the air gobble it up. In explaining the parable to his disciples later, Jesus compares the birds with the devil, who snatches the word away from people so they cannot believe and be saved. A little later, he will call Herod Antipas, who wants to kill him, a fox, by which he means a sneaky, low-down, nasty character. So when he mentions foxes and birds here, he may be employing metaphorical language. Whereas the powerful ones who are in league with the devil have comfortable and secure places to live, Jesus and those who follow him do not. This may be an implicit warning to this potential follower, not only that accommodations may be lacking, but also that Jesus' path would put him in direct opposition to these powerful ones. And you better think twice before getting on board that train. Jesus is not just some homespun moralist and country preacher. His mission has a decidedly political edge to it. In the next two episodes, we find potential disciples making excuses. Luke writes, "To another, Jesus said, 'Follow me.' But he said, 'Lord, first let me go and bury my father.' But Jesus said to him, 'Let the dead bury their dead. But as for you, go proclaim the kingdom of God.' Another said, 'I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say farewell to those at my home.' Jesus said to him, 'No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God.'" Now these responses sound pretty harsh in our ears, in mine anyway. What kind of teacher would not allow his student the time it takes to hold a funeral and a burial for his own father? What kind of egotist would think his own task more important than another person's basic familial duties? And who could be so demanding and impatient that he would not allow a potential follower to go home long enough to kiss his mother goodbye, or at least to leave a note telling him where he's going. This sounds like the characteristics of a cult leader. It sounds more like David Koresh than Jesus Christ. What we have to remember is that Jesus was a well-known practitioner of hyperbole, extreme exaggeration for effect. Think of his comments about camels passing through the eye of a needle, or his instructions to chop off your hand or pluck out your eye if it causes you to sin, or his declaration that to follow him you have to hate your family. Did he mean any of these things literally? I don't think so. He's simply setting up a contrast between two values. On the one hand, the value of one's wealth or bodily integrity or family ties, and on the other, the value of the reign of God. In his mind, the reign of God so far outstrips these other, more conventional values that it's not even worth talking about. He's doing the same thing here. The proclamation of the good news of the reign of God is so important, so urgent, that it brooks no delay. And the life of the reign of God so far surpasses normal life that those who do not participate in the reign of God might as well be dead. Elsewhere in the Gospels, when Jesus calls persons to follow him, they immediately drop everything and hit the road with him. Somehow they see and understand at a glance that real life is to be had only in the company of this Jesus, and that to follow him is the only true adventure. All else pales in comparison. Of course, we've also seen, in this very passage, in fact, that some of those who exhibited such a great faith and enthusiasm at the outset don't yet understand all that Jesus is about, even after weeks and months in his company. So maybe we should not be too hard and too quick to condemn these hesitant ones. Perhaps they see something that gives them pause and makes them want to hedge their bets a little bit. Perhaps it's something they see in Jesus' face. Perhaps the resolution they see there scares them. Perhaps they see it more clearly than the first disciples did back on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And like the Samaritan villagers, they're not so sure they want to be too closely associated with this dangerous character. Jesus has set his face to go to Jerusalem, and perhaps these are the more discerning souls who have an idea what that means. Come to think of it, the apparent harshness of Jesus' responses may actually signify compassionate understanding rather than condemnation. After all, a little later in Luke's Gospel, Jesus himself will counsel prudence before one takes to the road of discipleship. He will say, "Which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and couldn't finish.'" He seems to be saying that if you're not up to the rigors of discipleship, if you're not willing to set your face to accomplish the task at hand, it's better that you don't start at all. If the reign of God does not rate higher than your family, your instinct for self-preservation, or any other competing value, just stay home. Now, none of this makes these guys right or admirable. It makes them prudent. But in Jesus' estimation, and in God's, there are virtues that are more important than prudence. One who truly catches a glimpse of the surpassing value of the reign of God will throw caution to the wind, sell everything one has to buy the pearl of great price, leave one's fishing business or tax booth on a moment's notice to follow the charismatic young rabbi, leave 99 sheep in the field to go chasing after one stray lamb, put one's hand to the plow and not look back. God doesn't keep score the same way we do. And who knows but that the impetuous followers who get more than they bargained for, who will suffer and eventually die as martyrs for their commitment to Jesus' way, but who carry on anyway, aren't in better shape in God's sight than the ones who see the consequences and prudently shrink from the path. I hasten to add that we don't really know what happens with these three would-be disciples. Luke does not tell us what they decide after Jesus lays it on the line. They may very well say, okay, my brother can handle the funeral details, or I like camping out, or I suppose my parents will figure out what happened to me eventually and join up right away. Who knows for sure? But even if they each do go away sad, the way the rich ruler will later, and choose not to follow the way of discipleship, there may be hope for them yet. We find a precedent for this hope in the passage from 1 Kings that Joe read earlier. It too is a call narrative. It too shows a person hesitant to respond to the call. And it too, strangely enough, involves a plow. Elijah is winding down his prophetic career, and the voice of God tells him to anoint Elisha as his successor. He finds Elisha out in the fields plowing, and without a word of explanation, throws his cloak over him, an act that both men seem to understand as a form of commissioning. Elisha runs after Elijah, who has unaccountably kept walking, and like the would-be disciples in Luke says, let me kiss my father and mother, and then I will follow you. Like Jesus, Elijah reads this as reluctance on the part of the younger man, so he tells him enigmatically, go back again, for what have I done to you? And continues on his way. Verse 21 then reads, Elisha returned from following him. This appears to confirm Elijah's suspicions about his readiness for the task. And when you think about it, it's kind of a no-brainer for Elisha to say, thanks, but no thanks. After all, he apparently comes from a family of means. He has plowed the field with 24 oxen, and apparently has a fair number of servants and hired hands assisting him. The writer of 1 Kings consistently calls him Elisha, son of Shaphat, which would seem to indicate that he is the heir of a man of some importance. Elisha clearly has a lot to lose by following the prophetic call. And what does he have to gain? Elijah has spent the better part of the last 4 years either living in a dry creek bed being fed by ravens, or relying on the somewhat begrudging hospitality of a Sidonian widow for his room and board. Plus, he has run afoul of the queen, and his mug now decorates every post office in Israel. The posters say, public enemy number 1, wanted dead or alive, preferably dead. Under the circumstances, I can understand Elisha's hesitation. But that's not the end of the story. After thinking it over, Elisha has a change of heart. He decides to throw caution to the wind, leave his nets at the seashore, as it were, and follow the call. He slaughters the 2 oxen that he was driving and burns the yoke to cook the meat and feeds the people. He is cutting his ties. He is saying symbolically, here is my Rubicon, now watch me go across. The writer tells us, then he set out and followed Elijah and became his servant. The story of Elisha strikes me as good news. It tells me that it is never too late to follow the call. Maybe you have heard the call of Jesus, but other cares have held you back from following. Maybe you have considered the cost of discipleship and found it a little bit too steep. Maybe you have been afraid to dive straight in, and the times you have dared to put your toe in the pool, you have found the water icy and have drawn back. But still, you hear that nagging voice in the back of your head. You feel the call of Jesus tugging at your heart. If that's the case for you, hear these 2 truths. It is never too late to respond to the call. And it is the best decision you will ever make. It will cost you everything, but it's worth it. It's a hard road, but there is joy when we walk it together. Today may be the day for you to set your face, put your hand to the plow, and not look back.